As we continue Lent, I think we're always reminded that God is asking and wanting us to go deeper. Not just in these surface level things, but deeper into the greater spiritual realities. And today that image is given to us through our thirst and how we quench our thirst. We hear it in the first reading about the Israelites and their thirst, and then of course we hear it in the gospel today as this Samaritan is thirsty and she's at the well. And then Jesus tells her that he has living water. In other words, there's this surface level thirst, and then there's a deeper thirst, and I can quench that for you. And so we're brought to that image that this is the water that we should seek. And I think given many ways in which we can maybe see how that water is given us, that living water, and how we're quenching that eternal thirst, if you will. One way I think we can see it is maybe last Sunday's gospel, and how Peter and Andrew, James and John were in a way given that living water by witnessing the transfiguration, that they had this great spiritual experience of seeing Christ transfigured, his divinity in a way shown to them. And I think we were reminded then maybe that these things too happen in our life. And maybe it was a great prayer experience. Maybe it was from a retreat or something like that we experienced this great spiritual reality. And just like Peter at the Transfiguration, maybe we wanted to stay in that moment. But we're asked then to come down from the mountain as they were. That we don't stay in those moments for whatever reason. Jesus wants us to live in this world that is not always that way. But I think today's gospel offers us another situation in which we can receive this living water. This woman is receiving this water, whether she realizes it or not, in this great conversation she's having with Jesus. And I think maybe we can remember that too in our lives, that maybe we've had a conversation, maybe we've had a situation that seems very human like this, in the presence of another person, sharing with another person our life. And maybe we're even kind of brought to that deeper level, very similar to as if we had that great prayer experience. And God is asking us to have these conversations, to go deeper. And hopefully we have, and hopefully we allow ourselves to have those conversations. This whole story reminds me of a deep conversation that I did have myself several months ago. I have a spiritual director in Austin, in the Austin area. And I go down there, I try to go down there once a month to receive spiritual direction. And because it's so far, I usually try to make it a couple of days where I don't have to just go in and leave right away. It's too far to do that. So I try to make it maybe a little trip, not only for spiritual direction, but then kind of just renewal of myself, taking a little bit more time off. And so this trip was no different, and I was there a day early. In the evening before my spiritual direction, I decided that I was hungry, and as we discussed in these readings, I was thirsty. And so I decided to go have a bite to eat and a drink at a local bar. Now, I was there with nobody, so I was on my own. And so I sit at the bar at this only seat left next to this other man who I kind of noticed was there on his own. Again, I was looking to quench my thirst. Not necessarily from the wells, but more from the drafts. You know what I mean? And so as I was quenching my thirst, I, of course, began the conversation with this man next to me. It happens somewhat often. I was not in my clerics, so it wasn't blatantly obvious that I was a priest. But as any normal conversation goes, usually the question, "What do you do?" comes up. And so, of course, then was revealed my job, that I was a priest. But of course, I was greatly appreciative of this. It happens a lot, and sometimes when you mention you're a priest, it either brings the conversation to a whole nother level or stops the conversation completely. But this time, I was thankful that it brought it to a new level, because I felt like it was when Jesus told this woman, "Oh, you don't have one husband, you have five." In other words, his prophetic thought, his prophetic words were something that brought the conversation deeper. And this conversation I was having with this man then did that. I was not expecting where this conversation would go, and it was a very powerful conversation for me, especially after I had revealed that I was a priest. He began to reveal to me that he was Catholic, and like many people had fallen away from the church. There's always many reasons for this, but this man's reason struck me. This man had told me that when he was a child, he was abused by a priest. And I had never really necessarily had a conversation with somebody who had that happen to them. And as this conversation got deeper into that, I could tell that we were both then at that point very much so drinking living water. Jesus' presence was very much so there. It took me by surprise, and I was very happy and honored that this man put aside those fears and those anxieties, if you will, those reluctancies that he should have, that I would think he should have, when I sit next to him, a priest. The very thing that represents the thing that hurt him. That he would put that aside to then have a conversation with me was what I felt like Jesus was similarly doing with this woman whom he shouldn't have been talking to. It wasn't the custom. It was something that would have been very much so taboo. For him to have sat down and had a conversation with a woman who was a stranger, with a woman who was a Samaritan, with a woman, period. That this was very taboo. Yet Jesus put aside those judgments and had this deep conversation, which was beneficial for them. So this man did that for me. I felt like this conversation too led us to drink more of living water because of that terrible situation of the priest abuse. It was unfortunate, but it happened that I think priesthood had gotten an image of negativity, that there was a stereotype then put on all priests. And of course, that weighs heavy upon the priest. It weighed heavy upon me. That we shouldn't, of course, have this stereotype. We shouldn't have this negative image because of some bad apples. But we did, or at least I thought we did. And it helped me when this man revealed to me that he said, when I saw all of these others coming forward to talk about the abuse, he says, I felt that I needed to too, for healing. And then he said to me words that I needed to hear. He said, I never wanted to hurt the church or the priesthood. I was just seeking healing. That helped me bring me to that level of understanding of what happened, that it needed to happen. And I put aside that heaviness, and I was able to be relieved of that, if you will, in this conversation. And then I was hoping that then that living water would flow too. Then when I offered words, and I said, I don't know what this is worth for you, but I felt like I needed to do this. I said, as a priest, on behalf of priests and on behalf of the church, I'm so sorry, and I seek your forgiveness. Though I had nothing to do with this situation, though personally I wasn't involved in these things, I felt like I needed to do that. The apology was accepted, and the forgiveness was given. And again, though I had nothing to do with it, I felt that forgiveness. The living water was flowing, if you will. Jesus was there, giving us both this water. And I feel like that's what's happening in this great story with him and the Samaritan woman. And I feel like the reason why living water is flowing and being received is because wounds are being opened. There is intimacy there. And I feel like that's something that we should all do. Not only should we seek these spiritual moments like the Transfiguration, we should seek these very human moments with one another in which we open up these areas and living water can not only flow, but then be received. When I think of this opening up of our wounds, I think of Christ on the cross and how his side was opened and blood and water flowed. That's that living water. And when we open up ourselves, Christ then too opens up his wounds. I think especially in the sacrament of reconciliation, when we do just that, we open up those intimate areas of our life, we open up those wounds, and let that living water flow. Christ then too opens his wounds. And the living water that is his grace of forgiveness is flowing to us. But I don't think it's just in the sacrament of reconciliation. We should do this with one another. Now, I'm not saying we should be an open book to everyone we meet, but I think we do need to have these people in our lives in which we can open up to. And we should have these deep conversations, whether that be to a loved one or sometimes, in certain cases, to a complete stranger. But when we have these moments, again, we are opening up our wounds, they're opening up theirs. And that living water is flowing from our wounds, but I realize now too, many times it's through these wounds that we actually also receive that living water. So we go and search for that water to quench our thirst that I know we are thirsty of. We all have that thirst for something greater, something deeper. Of course, last week we remember that comes in prayer. But in this time too, it comes in almsgiving. It comes in giving ourselves to one another in our need. And when we seek that water from one another, Jesus is there when we open up our wounds. And his living water is flowing from his wounds to us, and we receive it.